Good morning, everyone. My name is Teresa Conroy-Roth, and you are watching the latest episode of Lightning Leadership. With me is Ida Quamina, who I think is just about as passionate about professional development and leadership as I am. And so when we met back in December, I stopped and I said, Ida, you're coming on the show. And she said, yes. And so super excited. So Ida, welcome.
Thank you, Teresa. I am very passionate about it and love to connect with people that, are equally as passionate. So thank you. And it's a privilege and an honor.
Oh, my goodness. So let's just get right to it.
Yeah.
Are leaders born or are they made?
It's funny. I think it's a little bit of both. I think when we say a leader is born, we look at people with certain traits, right? They can command people, or you look at a kindergartner and you're like, oh, look how those people are following, those other kindergartners are following that person, right?
Yeah.
But that's just one trait of leadership. I think leadership is more about evolving, right? How do you evolve as a leader? I think you start with some beginning traits, and sometimes we miss the people that we don't see as the born leaders because we don't see them as traits that we think about traditional leadership, which is, can they command a room? Can they command people? Will people follow them, right?
Yeah.
And we have leaders that evolve along the way that are some of our most, dynamic and excellent leaders because they learn traits along the way. The important traits like how to listen to people, right? How to be empathetic, right?
Yes.
How to be agile, how to change in different ways, right? How to respect different people's opinions, right? And not just getting people to follow you because they're afraid of you, but getting people to follow you because they're inspired by you, right? And those are things that, you don't learn overnight, right? You develop and you evolve those qualities, right? That you see in others, right? And you learn how to work with people in different ways. And that's what gets you to the ultimate leadership, qualities. So I think it's not one or the other, right? It's evolution of that.
Constant change, right? But with that, I think comes self-reflection. With that comes feedback. With that comes mentorship, and people helping along the way.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I mean, if I look at my own leadership journey, right? The leader I am today is not the leader I was 10 years ago, right? And how I evolved was because of exactly the things you said, right? People that took me under their wings, right? Feedback that I got from people, that I was managing about not so much the great things that I was doing, but the things that were like, hey, you didn't show up right, or this is how this impacted me. Those were the meaningful feedback pieces, right? In order for me to transform as a leader.
Amen. Amen. So when you look at good leaders and then you look at great leaders, what makes a great leader?
Yeah. And it's funny. I think what makes a great leader today is very different than what we thought about what made a great leader 10 years ago, right?
Amen.
And a lot of that has to do with just our population and the way people are thinking are evolving, right? To me, great leaders are leaders that treat people like people, right? And realize that, people have lives outside of their, circumstance, whether you're leading someone at work or you're leading someone at a project or you're leading someone at a nonprofit, right? Taking that holistic person view into consideration when you're leading people is important these days, right?
Yes.
We have a whole generation of people that are thinking about things in a very different way, right? So I think that empathy, that caring, and that doesn't mean sometimes people translate that to be a weak leader, right? You can still make decisions, right? And stand in front of a room and to say, okay, I heard everybody's opinion. I understand everything, but today this is what we need to do, right?
Sure.
So I don't think it's the, oh, you're a weak leader, right? Because you're people oriented, right? You can still be decisive and care about people.
I think so too. I mean, I think you're looking at managing and leading at work, right? And sure, you've got a specific task that you're leading or managing through, and then you're managing a person, and those persons have wants and needs and dreams and goals, right? And challenges that they're facing outside of the work that sometimes trickle in. I can't, I can be 100% transparent, and I can't necessarily say that, I've done the best with that over the years, but there have been times right? Where you're just like, this is this, I have to solve this problem first, and then I can be fully present. But in the meantime, I'm finding some sort of a blend, right, between the two. And that's what I have today, or that's what I have this minute, or that's what I have this hour. And it's gonna change, right? And so there's that balance. But I think as I've evolved, right, in my career, I've been able to, with the help of a number of people around me, I can't do this journey alone, right? Been able to find a better balance than I did, 20 years ago. And so that's a beautiful thing. That's a
Yeah,
beautiful
absolutely. And you mentioned something very important about transparency. To me, I think that's one of the most important leadership qualities, right? People want authentic leaders
thing.
today,
Yes.
right? They want leaders that are real people that can say, I have flaws, right? I
Mhm.
have areas of opportunity. Here's what I'm working on, right? People appreciate that because they realize that not everybody's perfect. And not only that, as a leader, when you can say that, it also gives your team the permission to also be vulnerable and feel like they're in a safe space, right? Because we all learn by mistakes, right? My greatest learning moments were mistakes I made, in reference to that. And if we don't give people that safe space and we're not transparent as leaders to open up to say, hey, I don't know it all, right?
Yeah.
This is how I went through the journey of trying to figure it out.
Mhm. But with that comes trust. With that comes honesty, and creating that safe place of saying, here are, the 5 or 6 things that I'm working on. Here might be the 1 or 2 that involve you, but let me show you the big picture, and then we can talk about the day to day, right? And I think there are times where, looking back, right, that I could have done a better job. On the
Mhm.
flip side, there were times where people that I reported to or that I was on a team with, gosh, it would have been so much better, to kind of have that openness, right? That the shared story, so that there were no hidden agendas. If you make the agendas, fully transparent, you can have those conversations, and it's so much easier to work together. One of the things I learned, through my time just within the couple of years ago, was positive intent, right?
Yes.
From a
Yes.
leadership perspective, just
Mhm.
assume positive intent.
Mhm.
And that was, once I started doing that, I think the first few months was kind of hard, just because you just automatically assume. And then trying it was a game changer for me, right? In my leadership, in interacting with people, with asking questions, just assume that everything is positive. And that was, from a leadership standpoint, just huge.
I love that, Teresa. It's funny. I mentor a lot of budding leaders here. And that's one of the things I talk about, right? Is, because leadership is all about dealing with people, it
Yes.
really is, and as leaders are coming up, what I tell them is that, you've been such the doer, right? And you've been the hands on doer. When you move up that, ladder to leadership, it's more about dealing with people and influencing and having those conversations. And your whole thing about positive intent, it is such a game changer, right? Because I call them also teachable moments, right? Go in there not assuming what the person's going to say, not assuming that the reason why they're saying is negative. Understand the reason why they
Yeah.
have an objection to something, because sometimes it's not about they're trying to blow something up, is that either they don't have a good understanding or their perception is their reality, right? And when you get to the root of that and you
Right.
understand their perception, then it allows you to have a different conversation with the person, right? Because you're not automatically assuming that, oh, the reason why this person said this is because they're negative all the time and they don't want to be involved in that. And that's not to say that you don't have some people like that, right? But 99% of the time it's because people don't have a good understanding, right? Or they're fearful of things that are valid for them. So get to
Ooh,
the root of that, and you have such much more productive conversations with people.
that is awesome. Ida Comino, one last question. Biggest challenges facing leaders today?
I think, change, change, change. I
Yeah.
mean, there's so much change happening, right? And that's at all levels, right? I could not go here without, saying the word that everybody's talking about from a technology change, which is AI, right? If you're a leader and you don't even understand how AI is disrupting things, you are missing out, right? You are going to miss the boat, in reference to that. And that's also, how does it impact our people, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think the other thing too is that, you know, as a leader today, you're faced with so many different generational shifts in the workplace, right? You know, and each of those generations comes with its own way of working and thoughts and process, and you're trying to manage all of that, right? You know, from you know, and it's just like, you know, you've got, you know, our people over here that are just like, you know, wow, you know, I'm a baby boomer on the way out to our up and coming millennials and even, you know, beyond that, right? And
Yeah.
their way of working, right? And getting everybody to work together, you know,
Mm-hmm.
with all of that, and then layer on the changes of technology. It's like, whoo, it's a
Good
lot.
times. Good times. Good times.
Exactly.
Ina, thank you again for joining me. For those of you that are following along at home, catch us obviously on LinkedIn, catch us on YouTube. If anybody's interested in continuing the conversation, please leave a comment or reach out to Ina on LinkedIn. Thank you again so much. And as always, have a great day.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Teresa. Thank you.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.